Thank you, Brother Lamar. I'd like to express particular thanks to the committee that invited us here to participate in this forum with you today and to challenge you to take into account the seriousness of the moment in which we are now living and the opportunity that we have to do something about it. It is significant to me as I look at young black students across this nation, perhaps in a position to affect the direction of the whole nation, seemingly walking around lost, looking for direction when the issues are really very clear. What concerns me is that in a day of reckoning, there is no hiding place. The one cannot escape to heaven or to Africa if you are trapped in a burning house in America with no way to get to the airport or the shipyard. You got to deal with your own personal fire and getting it out before you can get somebody else's fire out. And in some sense, those of us who are in America are trapped in the belly of the whale, big white whale, Moby Dick Nixon. And in one sense, the whale's belly determines the parameters of reality. In other words, while in his belly, if you move on the whale in certain ways, the whale can, in his panic, flee into deeper water, open his mouth, and drown you, whether you are righteous or unrighteous, just because the whale has superior exterior power. On the other hand, if you use your head and you are sober, you can steer the whale into shallow water where you may be able to lead him into a measure of higher health as well as safety for yourself. But one does not have the freedom, it seems to me, while in the belly of the whale, to spend a lot of time arguing about the philosophy of other people who escaped the freedom out of other whales. Mao's Red Book in China ain't going to significantly help us out of this whale. Castro running to the hills in Cuba ain't going to significantly help us out of this whale. We got to develop our own self's book and figure out where his vital organs are and begin to organize our minds in such a way until we can move where we have maximum strength and where that whale is vulnerable. As I look over the movement that we have been involved in the last 18 years, by analogy, black folk would be likened unto the wheel in the middle of the wheel. And in some instances, those of us in the middle of the wheel have been turning faster than the outer wheel. And in some instances, that has created friction. But nonetheless, the inner wheel of black progress has been moving. One may say from a casual glance that the wheel looks the same as it looked 18 years ago when you first began to move legally in 1954. What is important for you to understand is if you just look at the way white people look and the way they think and the way they react, they have not changed very much in 18 years. But those of us within that wheel, we have changed so much within 18 years. There was a time when there was no conflict between the inner black wheel and the outer black wheel. Therefore, the outer white wheel could be slave masters without conflict. They could repress and did not have to pay a price for it. Because there's a certain definite movement within, either it adjusts or it will find itself destroyed. But it is important that the inner wheel is conscious enough of its power and its location to in fact be able to move strategically and with soberness. If the inner wheel is ignorant, it cannot force the outer wheel. Therefore, the inner wheel must have developed minds. If the inner wheel is drunk and trapped on dope, it will not have the strength, nor the intelligence, nor the alertness to move the outer wheel. If the inner wheel does not have any self-reality, if it underestimates its power, it will be shooting 30-foot jumpers when it could drive for a layup, only because it does not know itself and its speed and its power. Power, needless to say, is a relative proposition. Black America physically is relatively strong. Our minds are relatively weak. Our self-awareness is relatively weak. Our political consciousness is relatively weak. Our being involved in finding out who we are is relatively new. Our growth is relatively fast. In 1965, we had 3 black congressmen. Today we have 13 and moving toward 20 by November. We're moving relatively fast. We had no black mayors in 65 when we went to Selma. Today we have 84. We had 400 black elected officials in 1965. Today we have 2,100. Our minimum percentage share would be 21,000. Which means that we have about 1% of what we deserve, but we have 1,000% in 7 years more than what we had. But this growth, ironically, has happened in the last 5 years not because of the urgency of the black student movement and the young white aware student movement. This movement has taken place in spite of, not because of. While the hippies were tripping and drinking and skipping and going to other worlds and ripping off to Canada and to Sweden and running around glorifying children in black, red, and green colors, some people never left the case and kept right on working. And in some sense, those unknown persons who are the guardians of our legacy, whether we are drunk or sober, in school or out, we have to relate to them at a very significant level as we analyze where we are today in American history. It is always important in a movement to know what time it is. There's an old saying going around now in the black movement. The question is raised, what time is it? And that was the time we would go to our watch, made by the Swiss, controlled by the Americans, and say, well, it's 12:30. Well, that's relative because it's 2:30 in Chicago and 3:30 in New York. And it's about 7:30 in Honolulu. time playing tricks on us. About 9:30 in Honolulu. And the man at different seasons of the year, when the sun rises earlier and sets later, he'll even change this. Tyrone Davis put out a song about turn back the hand of time. Man does that whenever he wants to. But there is another time schedule that can be ingrained in your mind. For even if you are too poor to afford a watch, you know it's time for sleeping people to wake up, frightened people to get courage, and ignorant people to get information, the little people to rise up and to declare their somebodyness. And you say that it's nation time. It is nation time. But going along with nation time is nationhood. And nationhood requires the organization of a nation. And it further requires the identification of that nation and also a lot of responsibility within it. I want y'all to hear me now. When we say black nation in America, what are we talking about? We're talking about 25 million black Americans. A hybrid group of people. Can't be judged by skin color, have to be judged by experience and pain. Because we are hybrid children, our skin colors range from beige black to treble yellow. Some of us talk smooth and sing mellow. Some hair straight, some kinky. Some called by European names, others called spanky. But by history and heritage and experience and pain, we are a people. We have African roots, but we are American fruits. Perverted by European brutes, it makes us strange fruit. And in a real sense, neither African nor American, but new people. Who are we? 25 million strong, relative to what? Seen as a nation of people, it means that we would be the 26th largest nation on earth of any other nation organized with sovereign territory. It means that we would be the third largest black nation, third only to Nigeria and Ethiopia. With a gross national product of $42 billion a year, it means that we would be the 16th wealthiest nation on earth and the richest black nation on earth. With 7.5 million registered voters, when in a nation where Kennedy beat Nixon by 100,000 votes, and Nixon beat Humphrey by 500,000 votes, 7.5 million votes intelligently directed can determine who will preside over the most militarily powerful nation on earth. That is relative power, but it's close to absolute power if our minds are together. Our greatness is the 7.5 million voters who could potentially vote on self-interest and redeem us. Our weakness is that we have 6.5 million more voters potentially unregistered. So we're operating at about 50% of our potential political strength. And some of us, in the face of the giants and the obstacles, rather than get down to the serious business of organizing the good ones against the bad ones. We talk junk about the bad ones and never relate to the good ones and just stay in our own personal thing. But the movement is bigger than that. If you wanted to be relevant in 1954, you had to support the Supreme Court decision. Supreme Court decision was not for social integration. It was against legal segregation or apartheid, whereby the American government up until September 54, as a result of the scheme in Reconstruction, was able to legally separate, isolate, and suffocate and render helpless black people. So following statement that talked about equal protection under the law, if we're going to have one nation, one army, under God, indivisible justice, we must have one judicial system, one school system, and one housing market, where people function with options, not by force but with choice, where we don't argue for segregation or against integration, but we argue for participation because we are people and we deserve choice. That was a significant decision, never to be played lightly by aware people. 55 to 64, the movement took another direction. Began to fight against the public accommodation signs of embarrassment. Couldn't use the parks and couldn't use the libraries and couldn't use the hotels and the motels and the public facilities. Reinforced our sense of inferiority. But as a result of some people crying and others walking and praying and some others even dying, by 64 we changed that law. So to be relevant in 63 and 64 was to support the student sit-in movement and to support the Birmingham movement and its ends. In Selma, we shifted from asking the man to protect us and began to seek power to protect ourselves. Alabama in 1965, there were no black elected officials in the state. At that time, 35% black. Today, there are 106 black elected officials in Alabama, 2 in the state legislature, and 2 will be congressmen in 1974. Some black people in that wheel have never taken their eyes off of the prize, and that is the chance to express themselves and to represent themselves. Some people at that time were aware enough to move from powwow, just talking about change and wishing for change, to move toward power. Now here's the difference. Powwow is just be rapping, going through rituals and breaking folks' fingers, looking strange. But power is seldom seen but usually felt, because it is the ability to cut off our supply your adversary's need. Cut off our supply. That's power. One labor leader's definition of power is the ability to make your enemy say yes when he wants to say no. From a coal point of view, it is cutting off his oxygen or supplying it when that is his lifeline. But to get power, you first must have organization. And organization comes out of unity. And unity comes out of leadership. And leadership's backbone must be ideology and historical perspective. So number one, we must know what time it is. In 1972, economics is the issue. Just like in 54, the Supreme Court legal decision was the issue. We now got our civil rights. Fish have the right to swim, and you give him a bowl with no water in it, you either pervert the fish, rob him of his fish integrity, or he dies. So freedom cannot be an abstract proposition. We now got the right to go to any school in America, but we can't pay tuition. We got the right. We got the right to move in any neighborhood in America, but we can't pay the notes. We got the right to buy in a car in America and do buy them for 2 months. Do buy them for 2 months. Because at this point in time, we have the right to move, but we do not have the gas and the finance to energize us to move. So when you look for simple clarity, somebody say, what is your problem today? Economics. What is the solution? Economics. What is the goal? Economics. In other words, once you hone down your rhetoric and comb through your experiences, your ideology becomes an idea. An idea whose thin line can thread itself through all of your activity. Now that we now have our legal foundation and our social foundation and beginning to get our political power, it leaves us in neocolonialism. This is the stage where we now have black elected officials who are officiating over slums. They are now presiding and mayoring over cities that are broke. They are oftentimes inheriting political offices and having to hire the colonizers to be their administrative assistants because the colonized training and mind development is not in proportion to the external growth. That's why when you come to a university such as this, you can't get misled by the liberal white whose options outdistance ours. Because when he finally does bathe, and finally does shave, and finally does legalize marijuana, he inherits what his daddy owns. And when you finally shave, and finally bathe, and finally start acting halfway right, you inherit what your daddy owns. And since you done went away to school and had the chance to get some education and didn't, what your daddy owned ain't much, but what he disowned is you. It suggests that we cannot settle for a black house on the corner of UCLA's campus with black, red, and green curtains because this university has more to offer than a corner. It suggests to us that we must go beyond black anthropology and black history, digging up the great bleached bones of yesterday's black heroes, where we kind of peep the whole card of our own sense of cynicism, where we have the tendency of lowering black heroes while they are alive by criticism, and then trying to raise them when they are dead by expressing our guilt. We cannot just stay in black history, but we must now analyze the black present, the primary election in '72 in California, and then project black future. Black history has its place. From history you get a sense of psychological self-esteem. You learn where you came from, you learn how to make some errors, how to not make some errors twice. But you must hastily move on from history, where you came from, figure out where you are, and immediately move towards where you got to go. And to do that, you got to develop your mind. You can't teach what you don't know. And you can't lead where you don't go. And a symbol may help you identify with your neighbor today. Hairstyle, clothes style, using 2 or 3 foreign words that we give definition to. That won't pull it. I had a dog one time named Spody. I was down in Greenville, South Carolina, where I grew up. And Spody was a freak for barking. Every time somebody came, Spody went into his barking thing. My old man had a wood yard and a coal yard, and he used to go through his old ritual. And we had a turf. Didn't no dude bust up in our turf selling wood and coal, because that's where my old man made his thing, and he had his scheme set up. And a lot of bad things happened to you if you came to our neighborhood selling wood and coal, because that was my granddad's turf. Granddaddy had this thing going, coal man, coming by your door. Get your coal right now. It ain't coming no more. Coal man, only man coming, guarantee it. Well, he had a lot of ways to guarantee it. Wood, 20 cents a basket. Just making us a living. My old man becoming a black industrialist. That's what Nixon called it, capitalism. But we was chopping the wood, so we was selling it at our own self's price. Anyhow, when dog would come through there, Spody used to ride on my granddaddy's truck all the time. Had an old red truck, Spody ride up on the cab. And some other dude came through the neighborhood, Spody leaped across the bushes and started barking. That was one of my granddad's ways of guaranteeing that other people didn't sell wood in that turf. Anyhow, one day old man Rube Bennett, he knew good and well he should not be in our neighborhood selling wood and coal, because he stayed on the other side of town. He had his own turf he should have been controlling, but he called himself catching us sleep. Spody leaped across the bushes, and when he started, old man Rube, Mr. Rube had a bad arm. He got scared and kicked his truck out of gear and ran up on the porch, and everybody was hollering over there across the street on Mr. Ida's porch. They said, oh, Lord, said, look what Spody gonna do. And Spody was barking and bearing down. Spody ran right past Mr. Rube, and people should have said, well, good, he's not gonna bite the man. They said, oh, he's going to the truck. What is Spody gonna do? And everybody got all said, man said, look, say, relax. Spody gonna catch up with that damn truck, but he can't drive it. He's just a dog. And sure enough, Spody got to the truck, and all he did after he caught the truck was, well, I didn't get mad at Spody, because Spody is a dog. But wouldn't it be bad for us to take over an airplane and have to beg the man to fly it? Wouldn't it be bad for the man to give us some architectural plans and say, y'all protest and build this building? Then we get militant and say, I ain't gonna build it because in Blueprint, I want Blackprint. It suggests to me that part of the whole black urge and revolution has to take into account that excellence is our chief military weapon. To be needed is to be able to survive. To be unnecessary is for genocide to wipe you out on the computer. Societies and civilizations and nature ultimately do away with liabilities. We cannot get trapped into the economics of uselessness, not the politics of uselessness. That's why we've got to be involved in the primary in California. That's going to be pivotal to the whole nation. Saving a nation is at stake. We've got to have the kind of clarity and political sophistication to first to demand what we want before we argue about who we want. Because the issue is not just the black president, the issue is the black proposition. What is it that we want? Suppose all the candidates broke in the room right now and say, what do y'all want? We start talking about freedom now. Give us the freedom to cuss, and let us have the administration building and the cafeteria for a solid week. The reason I never got caught up in the anti-Semitism thing, because I'm an intelligent man. I ain't anti-nothing nor pro-nothing until I analyze it for myself. Because I'm not going to get hung up talking about we superior, got all the brains, got all the sense, knew everything God meant for us to dominate, and we're on the bottom, and apparently God ain't even mad about it. I ain't getting hung up talking about the black man got a strong brain, the white man got a weak brain, and the white man got everything and we broke. I'm too scientific for that. There's some other reasons why we messed up. And there's going to be some other reasons why we're going to get unmessed up. Because little men with big minds dominate big men with little minds. Little men with big minds dominate big men with little minds. We must have the ability to borrow that from other ethnic groups that make sense. We're about 12% of the American population, Jews about 3% of the American population, and yet they got more politicians than we got and more money. Ain't because God called them, it's because some of these universities called them and they answered when they got called. There is a continuous legacy of education and political involvement and economic accumulation. And many years of that will allow a minority to dominate a majority. God didn't give them Wall Street financial training, did it? And Allah, Yahweh, Elohim, Yaku, Zen, Buddha, and ain't nobody gonna give it to us. Changing religions and changing names ain't got nothing to do with changing your lot unless you can exploit the land with your mind. Reason why I'm so much against the dope thing, I think people ought to have the freedom to get high or to get low, but they ought to know what they're doing when they go either direction. It's important to me to understand that if your mind is undeveloped and if you are high, you will walk through oil and call it greasy water because you're unconscious. That you will walk through the forest and you will see trees, but a conscious mind will see lumber. You will walk across the beach and you will see some place to lay down, and the conscious mind will see bricks in the sand. A developed mind will see a brick and will see construction in it, and he will lay it. An undeveloped mind will see a brick and will see destruction in it, and he will throw it. Developed minds become important. To be able to look at the president in his Florida address on busing, and to be able to analyze it and make decisions is important for us to understand. Number one, the issue is not the bus, it's us. That's the first point. You got to be able to, because I've been to university, now I can analyze. And number one, the issue is not the bus, it's us. Apparently, number two, busing is not inherently bad, since more than 42% of the children in America are bused every day. Less than 3% for racial reasons. To stop busing would be to cripple the whole of the American public educational system. The issue is not the bus, it's us. But you got to go deeper than that. You got to say that in Reconstruction, when black folk were making progress, they had the military to protect them. Rutherford B. Hayes withdrew the troops, and when the troops left, the Ku Klux Klan came in as the new troops, took away our political rights, took away our land, locked us out of schools, and then humiliated us through segregation. So in the 19th century, Rutherford B. Hayes takes away the troops. In the 20th century, when we get ready to move, we go to the courts. Nixon takes away the courts. 100 years later, name changed, but the game is the same. When Nixon says community control, he ain't talking about black folk control Watts or Fillmore District. He's talking about Wallace control Alabama and Thurman control South Carolina. That is a community to a national president. We must have the ability to discern that. We run around talking about democracy and various forms of government. When this man rises up and suggests he's going to take his judicial arm to box in his Justice Department, to box in the judicial arm, and going to take television to intimidate the legislators by arousing the populace, he is talking about destroying balance of power, destroying separation of powers, suspending such democracy as there is, and moving into a sweetheart relationship with the Pentagon, and thereby ushering in a dictatorship, and elections may never be again. And you must have the ability to read that even when it's not written, and you can't do it if you're high. You can't do it if you're high. And you cannot read the political situation that profoundly if you don't study it. And that is pretty profound reading, ain't it? Say amen. All right. It says to us that at this point in history that jobs is the #1 crisis and busing is the #1 issue. We must make jobs the #1 issue if it is the #1 crisis. There are more people unemployed now than has been unemployed in 40 years. So many people unemployed until the Labor Department has stopped printing labor statistics as of the last 6 months. Number 2, we must move from jobs as the primary determinant for any presidential candidate to an alternative to the welfare system. Even good welfare is bad welfare. Because any system that barely feeds your stomach and frowns upon feeding your head or your hand has the effect of degenerating the human personality rather than regenerating the human personality. Thereby it locks you in a cycle and you can't grow. You can't deal politically with welfare unless we raise it above the level of a black issue. Numerically more white folks on welfare than black folk. There have always been more white folks on welfare than black folk. Welfare came into existence for white folk. Always been run by white folk. And if it's messed up, it's because of white folk. And therefore, when Time magazine and Newsweek talks about the welfare crisis and puts a black family on the cover and project into your mind that welfare and black is synonymous, that is the evidence of institutional as well as overt racism. That is the evidence. Therefore, I suggest to you that we must move rapidly toward tax reform. Even U.S. News and World Report says conservatively there are more than $40 billion in tax loopholes, enough to wipe out the welfare system and create a complete new job market. Somebody say ain't no jobs. That's not true. Money is not being spent in areas where jobs will be created. Can't no jobs be created up there jiving on the moon. I know, given how short we are on hospitals, there are potential jobs. Given how short we are on lawyers and doctors and nurses and engineers and constructionists and communicators, there are potential jobs, but the priorities of the nation are backwards. Say this in our close. I want to deal with a question or two. Somebody said to me yesterday, Reverend, the 300 largest corporations control everything in this capitalist system, and I don't see why a president gonna make no difference. Well, that brother had not analyzed the power of the president of the United States of America. This president can declare war in Vietnam without checking with the House or the Senate. This president can demand 30 sessions of primetime television in 18 months and brainwash a whole nation. The largest business in America is the American government, and the president and chairman of the board of that business is the president. And even though those 300 corporations have 75% of the American wealth, the largest feeder to those businesses of contracts is the American government, of which the president is chairman of the board and president. This president appoints generals and declares war or peace and affects attitudes and even ultimately behavior. Don't play it cheap. I would challenge those of you here in the state of California, get involved in this primary election based upon what black folk need and who can deliver, who's viable and who has a measure of integrity. Make your choice. Don't get trapped trying to assume that your uninvolvement is a decision to not vote for somebody, the decision to vote for somebody else. To not vote for one is to vote for the other. So in some sense, you have an obligation to make a choice between relative goods or between two evils, however you want to put it. But you got to get involved. For the right to participate, for the power of the vote, you have an obligation to work and to keep it. As bad as things are, things could get worse. For Martin and others who died, that this may become a reality, to not vote, to not get involved, is to throw dirt in their faces and to tell them that dying in Selma was worthless and did not make any sense. We have an obligation not to escape into other countries or to escape through cynicism or romanticism. We got to make decisions, and we can make them now. We're going to be the new generation, not just the now generation. We've even got to move on beyond the political order into a new value system. I'm concerned about our having doctors. But I'm concerned about doctors being more concerned about public health and personal wealth. I want new doctors. I'm concerned about lawyers, but I want new lawyers. Lawyers who are more concerned about justice than a judgeship. Preachers, yes, but new preachers who express and teach the gospel, but who are more concerned about prophesying, even if it's painful, than profiteering, even if it's comfortable. We got to have new teachers. Teachers who teach for life, not for a living. Teachers who teach because they can't help it. And students who have a will to learn that is so great until they will steal away by the branch, read by the moonlight, study, use whatever chance they have just to develop their minds. For if our bodies are paralyzed and our minds are developed, we can play F.D. Roosevelt and lead a nation rolling on wheels. But if our minds are paralyzed and our bodies are strong, we will tackle men Sunday after Sunday, rip and run and slide in the bases and rip and run and throw basketball through courts. And as giants walk back and ask midgets, what is the next play? If our minds are undeveloped. There's so much to say, but there's much more to do. Africa, Europe, Asia, a lot of people want to do a lot of help. Ain't no hiding place for work. Africa would help us if Africa could. America could if America would. Africa can't and America ain't. So we got to stand up.
We have to go to class. So
have about 5 minutes worth of questions. You guys go to class and I got to go to the airport. Greg. I didn't hear you.
Who's your choice for president in 1963?
Me, but I'm too young. No, seriously, my choices run something like this. For symbolic and emotional and ethnic reasons, I would go for Shirley Chisholm first. But I would then go for McGovern next. Of the so-called dominant candidates, he is more viable, more intelligent, more integrous, and more involved. Humphrey and Muskie are working out a scheme. The scheme is called 2 for the price of 1. Ain't neither Muskie and Humphrey running when they're saying the same thing and talking to the same people. So Muskie drops out and cut the cost and simply throws his support to Humphrey. Humphrey then has a chance to outdo McGovern and then pick up Muskie as his vice president as a payoff for getting his support thrown during the primary. So you end up with another 1968 situation, which is really an extension of the philosophy that now exists. I would take McGovern at that level because in 1967, when Dr. King, with his Nobel Peace Prize, took a position against the Vietnam War, they tried to accuse him of treason in all of the American newspapers and televisions. And even some of the black people got trapped into thinking Dr. King had overstepped his boundaries. And when McGovern took a position against the Vietnam War in 1967, and then Bobby Kennedy followed McGovern, it began to give Dr. King a kind of credibility that could very well have to do with saving his life for another year. Secondly, McGovern in his Senate Select Committee on Malnutrition and Human Need did more to make hunger visible in the country out of Washington than any other single person and our committee did since 1968. The third reason is while everybody was ducking and dodging behind Wallace in Florida, McGovern remained consistent. And to that extent, I would have reason to move for him way above and beyond Humphrey and Muskie, and yet I would, accept Humphrey and Muskie over Wallace and Nixon. So it's a kind of relative situation. But I would challenge the students in this state to know full well that the establishment leaders of this state are going to endorse Humphrey, and some of them are going to play games talking about Muskie, but the whole thing is to derail the McGovern-Kennedy-King movement style of operating in America. That's what it's all about. And that's why Muskie got out of the way so as to assure that happening. And the assumption is that Humphrey is going to inherit the black community because they are such blind Democrats. He may inherit it, but it won't because I'm going to be quiet about it. I'm going to tell it everywhere I go. Yes, a direct form of genocide to escalate the war, but it's a genocide against all kinds of people. Let me tell you what the great dilemma in America is. You see, once the greedy get a certain level of power, they will exploit the needy, even if it's their mama and cousins. So at a certain point, greed forgets about imam your relative. That's why Nixon's mamas ain't in them out here on welfare in California. Nixon don't give a damn about his cousins and them. He's trapped up in his new friends. Now, I want you to understand this. Our dilemma as young people is this. This is the tough one. It's so tough I'm almost afraid to tell you. It is that the man is trying to put genocide on whoever resists. So we are niggers because we colored, and white folks who are young are niggers because they are with us. So they get wiped out in Kent State just like we get wiped out at Jackson State. Understand that. But it goes a step beyond that. And that is that we cannot, in our fanaticism over genocide, run to suicide. trying to escape genocide by taking on tanks with a bottle, being mean when we should be meaningful. That's built into it. It even goes a step further. If we analyze how we're going to best break up this so-called genocide movement, it is going to be by realizing that we can only save ourselves by saving the rest of the nation. That's tough. The rest of the nation is willing to kill itself and kill us because it is so arrogant with its power. Charlie Finley is a microcosm of Nixon in terms of being willing to kill his profits, his team's chance at a championship, and even some of his dreams just to reach back and punish Vita Blue, which means that his suicide complex is so great, until to kill Vita Blue, he will kill himself just so there will be equality in the grave. Now that is the same kind of death wish that can be projected 1,000 times, and it's evidenced again when Nixon is willing to bomb Hanoi and Haiphong and pull China and Russia into a war, where we move toward a world war where everybody ends up being dead right. Thank y'all.